Televisión argentina de calidad. Clase Ejecutiva. El programa televisivo argentino con certificación de calidad ISO 9001-2008.
¿Desea usted un país de calidad? Entregue calidad. Exija calidad.
Una producción Nova Patagonia.
I am so pleased to be here to welcome you to this very important program as we celebrate many of the outstanding accomplishments and contributions that Hispanic Americans are making to society and to NASA specifically. I do want to thank the NASA Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity and our neighbors, Acting Comptroller of the Currency, John Walsh, you just heard from, and his staff. They work together really well to put on this event. So, like so many Americans, Hispanics have overcome great obstacles to make valuable contributions to society. Many industries, from boardrooms, major companies, to, of course, now the Supreme Court, halls of Congress, and senior government, people of Hispanic descent are flourishing and strengthening our country. At NASA, we have experienced firsthand the influence of Hispanic Americans and the role they've played in our agency's success and the nation's space exploration program. From the early selection of Franklin Chang Diaz, our first Hispanic American astronaut who was selected for the astronaut corps, but to the numerous contributions of Hispanic American employees every day. Now, one such outstanding person that I get to introduce you to today in our NASA family is our keynote speaker, José Hernández. He's originally from California and grew up in a family of migrant workers. I think many of you know his story. We have his bio printed. He has worked hard for his success. He did go to University Pacific, undergraduate, majored in electrical engineering. He received a master's then in electrical engineering from University of California in Santa Barbara. And prior to coming to NASA, he worked for 14 years at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and then joined the Johnson Space Center in 2001. In 2004, he was selected to the Astronaut Corps, completed his training, and just a year ago did join the STS-128 Discovery Space Shuttle crew that flew to the International Space Station. It's particularly exciting for me to have you here today as our keynote speaker. Please help me welcome José Hernández.
Thank you, Lori, for that very kind introduction. The thing that I want to sort of emphasize on is the fact that, you know, we're here for Hispanic Heritage Month. We're here to recognize the contributions of many Hispanic Americans. That's how they paved the way for people like myself to be able to prosper in this country. As the waiter said, you know, only in America can you come up from a background of working in the fields to actually, you know, from harvesting, I'd like to say from harvesting crops to harvesting the stars. And what I like to do is I like to start off and give you a little bit more about my background. And basically, I come, as was mentioned by Lori, from a typical migrant farm working family. And a lot of people says, well, what's a typical migrant farm working family? Let me paint the picture for you. It's basically what would happen is my parents are from Michoacán, Mexico. If you balance Mexico on a pin, you'll see that Michoacán is right in the middle of Mexico. And every February, my dad would load up the 4 kids, 4 of us, and my mom in an old car, and we would make a 2-day drive up to Southern California. And we would start off in Ontario. And we would work in picking strawberries. We would be there for about a month. Then we would move on to Central California, which is the Salinas area. And we would work picking lettuce, lechuga, and then working on the hoe for sugar beets, thinning out sugar beets and removing the grass. after that, we would spend the bulk of our time in Northern California, which was Stockton, Modesto, Tracy, around that Tri-City area. And there we would pick everything. We would start off the season with cucumbers, then cherries, green tomatoes for market, peaches, and then end the season with the grapes. This would take us about October, November time frame. At that time, then my parents would say, hey kids, grab 3 or 4 months of homework so you can take to Mexico with you so we can self-study in Mexico. And we would do that. We would now make a 2.5-day trip back to Mexico, and then come February, the process repeated itself. So you can see it was a pretty disruptive for a kid who spoke Spanish at home, trying to learn the English language. And that's why I always say I was not proficient in speaking the English language until I was about 12 years old. So my refuge has always been in math, because 1 + 1 is 2 in any language. And so I kind of took the refuge and naturally gravitated towards the math and science fields. And so what happened was, it wasn't until about the 2nd grade that and I'm the youngest of 4. It wasn't until the 2nd grade that I finally November rolled around, and I had asked my teacher for 3 months, 3 or 4 months worth of homework. Of course, during that time, she had been through the routine with my 3 other siblings, and I could just see her roll her eyes. She was a young Chinese teacher, tall. Well, you got a tall relative to a 2nd grader. She was tall, young, beautiful, and I remember she just rolled her eyes and she said, tell your parents I'm going to come home. I'm going to come home and talk to them about this. And I said, okay. And of course, during that time, we lived about 1.5 miles from school. And we would walk to school and walk back. Of course, nowadays, if you make your kid walk 1.5 miles, you get arrested, right? You can't do that nowadays. But in those days, it was okay. So those days, I ran all the way home that day, and I told my parents, hey, va a venir la maestra, the teacher's going to come. And of course, you get 2 different reactions from parents, right? The first one's from your dad. He starts going for the belt, right? He starts, okay, what'd you do? You might as well tell me now, because it'll be easier on you if you tell me now. If the teacher tells me, it's going to be worse. And I kept telling, I promise I didn't do anything. It's something about Mexico. He says, okay, you must have vale. You better be right. And so, and then of course, the other reaction from the teacher is completely, from my mom, is completely different, right? You get that Home Alone look. So the teacher's coming home. Let's clean the house. Let's make sure the house is sparkling clean. Let's make fresh tortillas, and let's make good food so that we can feed the teacher. I mean, in Hispanic culture, we have this deep respect for teachers, for educators, and so nonetheless, the evening came. It was one of the best dinners I had in a long time. I wish teachers would come home more often. And after that, basically my teacher got down to business, and she explained to my parents. She said, look, you have 4 kids that seem to like school, and she described it in terms that they could understand, and her broken Spanish and my parents' broken English. But the message was, you have to plantar raíz. You have to set root in one place so a tree grows nice and strong. Tree signifying us kids. And to my parents' credit, in spite of them just having a 3rd grade education, they took that advice to heed, and we started making Stockton our home. We still went to Mexico that year, but when we came back, we came straight to Stockton. And after that, our 3-month trips to Mexico started shrinking to about 3 weeks, centered around Christmas. So we minimized the amount of school we missed. And the other thing was that when we came home from school, one of the things that my parents always did, my mom, she always made fresh tortillas. She would sit us on the kitchen table and said, you cannot get out of there until you finish your homework. And she was making the dinner and the food for us, a snack to eat, and that's how we did our homework. She was able to help us up to the 3rd, 4th grade, but beyond that, we were basically on our own. It only took me once to try to pull the wool over over her head in terms of saying I finished my homework, you know, after the belt whipping, and I never dared do that again. So she was smart enough to realize, even though she didn't understand the work, she was smart enough to realize whether our homework was done or not. So I thought that was very important. And then the other thing is, you know, I think my parents would have made great psychologists if they would have studied college. The other thing that my parents used to do, my dad specifically, was after a hard day's work in the fields, we would come home. If you could picture this, when you pick cucumbers, you pick the cucumbers in rows, and the middle of the rows are muddy. So in the morning, your Levi's gets all muddy all the way up to about here as you're picking up the cucumbers. And then when the sun comes up during the day, you know, that kind of bakes onto your Levi's. So I remember we used to go home, us kids, and as we took off our pants, we used to take them off real carefully, so see who can make them stand up by themselves because of the mud. And that's who would win that day, you know. So, I got the muddiest. And but I remember we would get inside the car, and every day before my dad would, you know, turn the ignition, and it became a game after a while because we would say, he's going to forget today, he's going to forget, but he would never forget. He would turn around, and we would look at all four of us, and he would say, how do you guys feel? And, of course, we were cranky, we were tired, and we would say, we're tired. And he says, good. He says, remember this feeling, because if you don't study, this is what you're going to do the rest of your life. It's your choice. So I'm not going to force you to study, but this is what awaits you. So it's a pretty important lesson, I think what separated us from a typical migrant farm working family was the fact that a typical migrant farm working family, as kids get older, instead of letting them in school, they pull them out of school and they work 7 days a week in the fields, and then they go back to Mexico. My parents, I think, were smart enough to realize that that wasn't the right thing to do, and Monday through Friday, whatever school district we were in school, and Saturday and Sundays, we were hand in hand with them working in the fields. And while every kid enjoyed summer vacation or looked forward to summer vacation, the Hernández kids always dreaded it because we knew what that signified. That meant we're going to be spending 7 days a week in the fields and working. So that's how my childhood began. And again, as we started staying in one place, I picked up the English language and picked up schooling and was able to gain traction in my education.